Hey, fight fans, it's Pat Sullivan and Mike Parente here for Team CES, matchmakers at CES Boxing and CES MMA. And first and foremost, we hope everybody out there is healthy and safe from our families and from the Team CES. I know that we're all thinking of you all out there and hope for the best. But at this time where there's no fights to really talk about going on and preparing for our next events, we thought that Mike and I will give you some kind of insight on what it's like to be a matchmaker and all the craziness. Because Mike, most of the times people see the result of our work, they see the fights that go on, but we don't publicly share what it takes to get up to that point with some of the injuries that happened during training camp, some of the crazy stories that we have from the past. We always talk about we could write a book about random things that have happened at CES, but instead of writing a book, we're going to do a little Zoom podcast here to tell everybody out there exactly what it's like to be a matchmaker and everything from trying to find an opponent the morning of a weigh-in when another opponent doesn't show up, to finding a doctor in the middle of Bismarck, North Dakota, to do a CAT scan on 24 hours notice. I mean, we've seen it all. So I know we put out some information on Twitter to get some questions here from the fans or from fighters, and we'll go over those. But Mike, let's get into it and tell everybody what it's like to be a matchmaker. And no censors, gloves are off. Let's go.
This is the real raw inside information today. I think doing this Zoom podcast is kind of like walking into a Chinese restaurant through the kitchen and seeing how all the food is made, and then you never want to eat there again. Once you hear this, you're not going to want to get into matchmaking. If you're even thinking about it, you may not want to. You may change your mind after this. But you're right. A lot of people don't see what goes into it. They see the fight that night. They're in the audience. They see the results on the news the next day. But all the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into doing this, it's a lot of work. And I look at you and I kind of really started at the bottom of the totem pole at CS. I feel like this is one of those, the Paul Rudd meme, like, hey, look at us, like, really, who would think, I started out in the company writing about fighters. And I remember back in 2009 making airport runs, picking guys up, taking them to medical appointments and doing kind of the grunt work. And it's funny, now it's 10 years later, matchmaking, doing the publicity, and sort of being, you and I are kind of, we kind of consider ourselves Jimmy seniors, right and left hand. He calls us that a lot in press conferences. And It's true, we're kind of there for a lot of the major stuff. But you and I started out doing all the small things and just sort of worked our way up the corporate ladder, if you want to call it that. And it's funny now talking to someone younger working in the company and asking them to do the stuff that we did 10 years ago. And I think I feel bad at first. I'm like, you know what, man, screw that guy. I had to do that stuff 10 years ago myself. So I have no sympathy for it. But yeah, the matchmaking part of it, man, it's crazy. I don't remember when did you get into it?
So I wasn't the matchmaker for the first MMA fight that we did CS1 First Blood back in, God, what was that, 2010?
2010, yeah.
But the card didn't go at all the way that it was supposed to. Fighters are showing up to weigh-ins not knowing who they were fighting. I mean, it was such a disaster. So we had a team back the next day, and senior said, we want to keep this in-house. So I've interviewed every matchmaker that's out there, but do you want to give this a shot? And I said, yes. And, fortunately, I mean, there's no greater teacher in this sport than Mr. B. And,
sure.
He kind of sat me down and said, this is how you make fights. And obviously that was 10 years ago, and that the sport's evolved so much. And I mean, that was the first ever sanctioned fight in Rhode Island. And then, now we've gone to all these different states and done all these fights. So at that point, that was when I first matchmake. I tried my hand in matchmaking boxing for a little bit. And that was fun, but challenging. And it's just, you get two totally different sports, two different athletes. I mean, it's almost like trying to put together a football team and a baseball team, right? I mean, it's two completely different ways of training, of matching and styles and everything, but it's both sports have their challenges. And the first question I think is an interesting one, and then we get backtrack. But somebody asked me what the craziest and most ridiculous counter offer a fighter ever gave me for a fight. And you're laughing because I think you know what this one is. It was an MMA fighter who was making his pro debut, and he accepted a fight, signed a contract. Pro debuts don't make a whole lot of money. And he says to me, all right, I'll take the fight, signs a contract, sends it back. We send him tickets. And the day before the fight, he is in another state getting his hair braided. And I call him and I say, hey, we get the weigh-in today. Where are you? He says, oh, I'm on my way, but I got to talk about the offer. I'm not feeling it. I need more money. I'm like, well, you already signed the contract. There's no more money. And we're going back and forth. And he finally calls me. He says, all right, instead of more money, how about you don't even pay me $1, but you got to buy me a pit bull? It's serious. He was willing to do the fight for free as long as I went out and bought him a pit bull.
Imagine.
And, at one point I thought about maybe I could just go to the pound and find him a dog for free and this would all work out. But then I realized I don't think any commission would accept that as tender. They're buying someone a pit bull. But needless to say, that fight didn't happen. And that was a tough time going to that fighter and saying, hey, your opponent's not coming because he's getting his hair braided and wants a pit bull. So.
He basically, I remember that. I remember you pacing the office on your phone, leaving him voicemail after voicemail, like, where the F are you? Yeah. That's it. And I'll never, it's the line you and I repeat all the time, but, and that's the worst part too, like you said too, is having to go to that other fighter that day and say, oh, hey, by the way, your fight's not happening tomorrow. Sorry about you cutting weight for 6 weeks and selling tickets and, running around getting medicals done. Your guy skipped town. This kid that you're talking about was also a boxer, by the way. It was a very dubious record in the sport on that side. He wasn't very good at either. Wasn't very good at keeping a promise either. And he skips town without even telling you. Is in a different state to take a fight. Probably got his ass kicked there like he got in every fight of his life. And the people that suffer, besides us having to deal with it, are the fighters, the other guy. I had a close call recently, and there's so many crazy stories, but I think back to November. Brian Barbosa from Rhode Island was making a comeback. It had been years since he'd been in the ring, I think close to a decade. So now, right there, in his 40s, and anybody that knows Brian or remembers Brian in his heyday knows he could punch. So, but you're trying to find the right guy, because he is in his 40s. He's coming back from a long layoff. You have to be careful. You and I always want to make, Hagler Hearns 4, but there are times when you just can't do that. And you got to be careful. You got to match a fight that has to be competitive, but also, can't be unfair or uneven. So found an opponent named Tim Cronin from Canada, scheduled to fly in the morning before the weigh-in. No issues. I had seen copies of his passport, his visa. Manager was great to work with. It was one of those situations where it was rare, where dealing with someone that I didn't know, I actually didn't have a whole lot of fear or concern that they weren't going to show up. Needless to say, I'm at work at my other job, and I get a phone call that morning saying that he's not on the plane. We mean he's not on the planes? Well, he didn't get through customs. He got stopped. He got stopped at customs going through. Now, keep in mind, his manager in his corner boarded the plane, and they're on their way to the United States, and the fighter's left behind at the airport. Like, what are we doing here? So I'm like, you guys really need to stay. Well, they don't want to stay. They said, we'll figure something out. I'm like, well, weigh-in's in 24 hours. Like, we got to figure something out, like, now.
Right now, yeah.
What do we do here? He has an immigration issue. They had told me that there had been maybe a previous mark on his record, his legal record. And so there was something holding him up. Now, I guess basically, if you're traveling to another country for a job purpose, you have to have a specific visa for that.
Right.
So you have a work visa. Well, he didn't have the proper work visa. So now we're thinking about, what do we do here? Now we got to rent him a car. We got to wait overnight. And the next morning, the day of the weigh-in, he has to drive from Ontario to Providence, Rhode Island, and hope that he just gets over the border. Now I'm at work the next day. It's probably, 6-7 hours until the weigh-in. I'm not sure if this guy's even going to make it or not. I haven't said anything to Brian Barbosa's people because you don't want to get the other guy upset if you don't know for sure what's going on. And I'm just checking my phone every 5 minutes, waiting for a text or a call from the manager. Is he here? Well, he's a half hour from the border. Okay, he's going to the border now. He's a few cars away. What do you say? I mean, I've never been approached by a Border Patrol agent. I wouldn't know what to do, what to say, but he somehow fibbed his way through. We got over the border. And at that point, we decided it does not make a lot of sense to have him drive 8-9 hours and then get on a scale and then try to fight. So we had him drive to the airport in Buffalo, fly from Buffalo to Providence that day, and he had about a 2-hour window to get off the plane, get his stuff, check into his hotel, run his rear end down to Twin River, and get on the scale and fight the next day. And we pulled it off. But those are some of the things that people don't see, and especially you and I working for smaller promotion. We don't have a staff of 25 or 30. We don't have a travel agent that books that for us. Who's handling my travel? It's me. Who's booking my medical appointments? Me. And it's the same thing with you and I. So, we're the ones like the one-man band with the trumpet, the saxophone, trying to pull it all together. Right. And it's not always easy, but, it can definitely be stressful.
Yeah. And speaking of visas, I remember we had one fighter who got stopped at the border and was coming from Canada and was detained for almost an entire day because he had boxing gloves and mitts and all sorts of stuff tore him up. And they wouldn't let him in because they thought he was coming into the country to do something dangerous, but they didn't realize he was coming in to fight. But
I
remember,
guess
we
that's
had
dangerous.
Matt Bessette was supposed to fight somebody from Brazil, and the fighter calls me and says he's on his way to the airport. Coming from Brazil, it takes quite a time to get here. So this was, I think, Monday or Tuesday of fight week for a Thursday weigh-in, and keep getting all these messages on WhatsApp. We're on our way to the airport. Then all of a sudden, I get a call from his trainer, and he says, "I get some bad news. He just walked out of the government building with his head down and thumbs down, and we're not going to be able to get out there because he can't get his visa." Never told me. Every time I asked, are all the paperwork in? Everything was good. And then all of a sudden, I get a call. Oh yeah, we're not going to be able to come because he just went to get his work visa now and got denied right before he flew out. So that was, and that stuff happens. I mean, fortunately, we were able to find a new opponent from that, like always. But it's, and it's crazy. And that's something a lot of these fighters and fans don't see a lot of the time is the work that it takes for us to get a fighter here, but also when a fighter doesn't get here, to scramble and get someone last minute. And it's not easy. It's challenging. And, that's kind of where some of the crazier stories lie. But,
By the way,
I was thinking about,
I didn't answer your original question about the craziest offer or counter offer.
Yeah.
I sort of jumped around there, but I will say quickly, I was booking a fight for Giuseppe Cusimano, our big Italian heavyweight, back in 2017. And Giuseppe had just had his first fight in more than a year. He was rusty, and the fight that he had didn't last too long. It was kind of a mop-up, the typical tune-up fight. I reached out to a fighter from Phoenix who was, I think, 6-0, 7-0 at the time. Looked good on paper. I figured, why not make an offer, right? So he writes back and says, "Now, this is a 4-round fight. $10,000 plus food and travel paid." So now I don't know if the guy's just kind of busting my balls or he's serious. So I'm like, well, with all due respect, I unfortunately don't have $10,000 in my budget for one fight. He says, well, yeah, you know something? I'm actually closing on my house that day, and I had to cancel another fight. And he's like, every now and then I get a message from one of you matchmakers who think I'm some kind of an opponent. I don't appreciate it. I'm like, this tough guy. Like, who's this guy think he is? Like, it's easy to talk tough through Facebook Messenger and be a complete dick about it. And I just basically told the guy, listen, why don't you watch some film? Watch the film on the guy you're fighting before you make a rash decision or just act like an asshole about it, And sometimes, like, it's weird in this sport. I know you get it too, is you're making an offer for someone to basically work in the field that they work in. Like, I'm offering you employment opportunity.
Right.
Like, why am I the bad guy,
Right.
$10,000 plus food and travel. Needless to say, this fighter has fought a few more times since then and hasn't been active. So, which typically is the case for someone who makes a buffoonish offer like that. They don't really fight all that often. So, good riddance to him. His name was Adam Stewart, by the way. I'll mention it because I'm never going to reach out to the jerk again. And it's like, you could have been – I was cordial. I'm respectful when I message people. I speak well. I'm fluent, and not being a jerk. And this guy was just out of line with it. So hopefully he watches this and has something else to say about it. But he's not coming out to around or New England anytime soon unless he buys his own ticket.
All right. So this
gloves are off. You said gloves are off.
Yeah, gloves are off for sure. This question comes from someone on Twitter. What is your craziest story matchmaking that can sum up, maybe one of the toughest days you've had in the sport? There's been a lot of them, especially since, Mike and I have combined probably 20 years of matchmaking. And I think for me, there was a fight. It was our first show we were doing in Philadelphia, the 2300 Arena. And we had a great fight card. Jeremiah Wells was fighting for a world title and a bunch of other Philadelphia fighters. Just as I pull out of my driveway, this is the day of the weigh-in. It's probably 4 a.m. I'm going to pick up Jimmy Birchfield Jr. and then we're in Providence, so we're heading down to Philly for the weigh-in. And pulling out of my driveway, and I get a text, and I'm like, 4 a.m. That's weird. So I pull over, and it's from the opponent saying, I get some really bad news. I got a call late last night from my director in the Army, and he says I can't fight. He's not going to sign off on it, and if they do, then I'm not going to go into all the details, but it would have been really bad for his career in the service if he took the fight against his commander's orders. So I forward the text message to Jimmy. I said, there's nothing I can do at 4 a.m. So I sent it to him. And when I picked Jimmy up, he's just walking out, shaking his head. What the hell are we going to do? So we're driving down there. We found 2 other opponents to replace him in the fight. So we made 2 other world title fights on the way down to Philadelphia. And commission was okay with the changes. We made, we got medicals, everything in, and it was like the craziest 3-hour drive ever. I think Steve Mays was actually driving, and he's got a lead foot, so we got there a lot faster than we should have. But we finally get there, and the opponent shows up at the weigh-in, and he says, "Hey, I'm all set. I'm cleared. The Army approved me. I talked to somebody who understands the fight game. They're a fight fan, so I'm good to go." They weighed in. They had a great fight, and it's just like those are the things you go with. Sometimes even when a fighter says you can't fight, you still never really know if the fight's off until you get to the point where the fighter literally cannot get on the scale. But just the 3-hour drive from Providence to Philadelphia, trying to make a world title fight when we're getting on the scales in 6 hours was pretty wild. And to think that the government and the Army or the military was stopping this kid from fighting just because I think it was a paperwork error. But looking back on that was crazy.
Amazing. That's the funny.
If you cancel a main event to a show, I mean, there's a lot of repercussions that happen for a promotion. It's not just, hey, we got to move the co-feature up to the main event. I mean, all the marketing, all the promotions, ticket sales. I mean, there's so many other elements other than just fighter A and B getting into the ring or a cage. It's everything's involved, and travel and lineups, and this was live on was on Access. It was a live fight on Access, so there was a lot riding on that, and to have the Army pull the rug out from us at the last second was a little intense. But anyway, we got it done. But that's probably the craziest day I've ever had as matchmaking a fight.
There's been a couple weird ones recently. I feel like they're all happening in the last year, which is kind of odd. But I remember we had a big fight at Foxwoods. Chad Dawson was making his comeback against Quentin Rankin, and we also had Tremaine Williams on the card, the mighty midget from New Haven. Now, Tremaine Williams fights for Rock Nation, so we were working with Jay-Z's Rock Nation in association with this fight. And so there's a lot riding on that because it's not just a CES fighter, but now you're dealing with another promoter, other people in that company who have a lot of financial I guess you would say equity in the fighter. A lot of people relying on you to get this fight done. We found a great young fighter from the Philippines named Neil John Tabaneo. Neil was scheduled to fly out. Now keep in mind it's a long flight, and we're going to get to this later too about some of the issues with international fighters. The fighter had an EKG report that was sent over kind of late. We worked hard to get it done quickly, and the doctor read it. And now, so just to kind of set the scene for you, the guy flies in the day before the weigh-in. I have to have someone drive him over to a clinic, basically 5 minutes from the airport. And I'm thinking, no big deal. They put the things on, EKG, in and out. The kid's an athlete. He's 23 years old. Can't possibly be any issue with his heart, right? Well, get the report back. I get phone call after phone call from the facility. I'm at work. I missed a few calls. I check my phone. I look up. I call back. Hey, so we have an issue here. This fighter may be having a heart attack. I go, heart attack? Yeah, his EKG says acute MI. I've never heard of acute MI. I asked one of my coworkers who apparently watches a lot of ER or Scrubs or whatever and knows all these terms, is that's a heart attack. Like, there is no way in hell this guy's in the prime shape of his life. He's not if he was having a heart attack, he'd be on the floor in the clinic. Like, what do I do here? Like, obviously this is not going to fly with the commission. The clinic won't clear him to fight. So luckily we've got some doctors that we work with who have been helpful for us through the years. They're kind of on speed dial for us. I make a couple of phone calls. I managed to get him an appointment 6 o'clock that night. Now you're talking less than 24 hours before the weigh-in to go to the hospital in Rhode Island and do a stress test, which basically entails getting on the treadmill, and they're reading all your levels, and they're really doing a thorough, in-depth look at your heart. And you have a cardiologist right there to sign off if something goes wrong. And it's basically the last resort. Like, he has to pass this test.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind, I got a kid driving for me, helping out. I feel bad. I'm running this guy all over Connecticut, New England. Look, you got to get him back in the car. You got to get him to Providence tonight, and you got like an hour and a half to do it. You got to go from New Haven to Providence. I'm like, floor it and just get him there. And he gets the fighter there. Everything fine. Stress test good. Fight goes off unhitched. Never said a word to anybody from Rock Nation about it at all.
Until now.
But at that point, I'm like, you know what? If the thing falls through, I'm screwed either way. I'm gonna get crucified for this, so I might as well just wait it out and not get anybody nervous. I'll come up with a game plan the next day if something goes wrong. But the fight went off unhitched. It's a great 10-round bout between Tabaneo and Tremaine Williams. Williams ended up winning the fight. But those are some of the things, Pat, medical emergencies, right? Like, what do you do there? Because it's not just about losing a fight. you're worried about someone's health too. Like, I got to go to this fighter and say, hey, they think you have a heart problem. I mean, I'm sure the fighter's mind's racing and he's probably scared. And who knows? Sometimes you go for another test thinking something's wrong and you kind of psych yourself out. Like, a lot of things can go wrong there in that spin. And you kind of have to think on your feet. You got 10, 15 minutes to figure out how you're going to deliver this message and how you're going to get it done.
Yeah.
And I think the only way to do that is just years of practice, really, and just not panicking.
I think that's something that we learned over the years too, because maybe our first or second year, if a situation like that happened, we wouldn't have known how to react quickly to get him to see another doctor or to look it up. But there's definitely been a lot of times over the years where the fight's been off or fighter wasn't medically cleared, and then we just kind of sit back and relax for a minute, call each other usually, what would you do in this situation, and find a way to get it done. But there's been some really bad ones. I mean, remember we did a show at the North Shore Music Theater, and fighter A, Louis Carapi, was in the cage, and he already had his entrance music in. They already announced him. They go to announce fighter B. Oh, fighter B falls down the stairs and sprains his ankle and never comes out for the fight. So I think his music played about 3 times in a row. It was about 10 minutes. We're in the back with the doctors trying to figure out, what the heck happened. And we had to go tell a ring announcer to announce in the cage, hey, fighter B, well, actually, gloves are off. Keenan Raymond isn't coming to the cage. He got hurt walking to the cage, so he's not able to fight. And, poor Louis Carapi is in the cage, already warmed up. He's already ready to go. Somebody in the crowd had brought him flowers because this was like a big return fight for him. And I just felt so bad at that situation because, we always say, when a fighter passes medical tests or gets there and makes weight, and we're always like, all right, good, the fight's on. And then we always remind ourselves, fight's not on until both fighters touch gloves or the referee signals for the fight to start. And that's a perfect example. I mean, I know CES has had situations before we were there where a fighter got arrested on his way to the ring. And this happens throughout all the sports, not just CES. But remember, there was one fighter who we had to go through some pretty crazy hurdles to get a fighter medically cleared to fight. We finally get him cleared on the way to the event. And mind you, the opponent knows nothing about this. The local fighter knows nothing about this. We get him medically cleared. We're in the locker room. Both fighters are good to go. And this is actually a pretty good story to make it a broader story here. Is this was when we were off TV. We weren't doing TV fights yet. We were streaming to CES's Facebook and to our webpage. And we had invited Axis out. We took a risk. We flew the program director from Axis out from Colorado to come watch the fights. Now, the guy from Axis knows who the main, top 3 or 4 guys are on the card, and we build him up. He's excited to see him. Jimmy Jr. is upstairs having dinner with the guy, and Jimmy says, "Listen, don't bother me. I got to talk to this guy. Figure out what we're gonna do. So if you need me, you know where to find me, but don't need me." So we're like, okay. So I see him on his way up there, and I give him a thumbs up, like, fighter's good, he's cleared to fight. And Jimmy goes, good job. So I walked back in the locker room, and Mike was standing there. You were standing there, and you were like, "Don't go back there." Why? What do you mean don't go back there? I turn the corner, and there's about 12 state police officers, and they got this guy in handcuffs, and they're dragging him out the back, and the guy's screaming, he's crying, and he's kicking and screaming, and the police officer's like, "I'm not telling you anything." So I looked at Mike, "What do I do here?" And he's like, "You got to go tell Jimmy." So I ran upstairs, and I was like, "Jimmy, I'm so sorry, but can I talk to you for a second?" And, "Oh, hey, Mr. Access TV, nice to meet you too, but I got to borrow him for one quick second. Nothing's wrong. I just got to talk to him." So I go to Jimmy. I told him the situation, and he says, "Is the guy already in the cruiser?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Okay." There's nothing you could do at this point. The guy's already arrested. I can't go down to the station and get him out. I mean, it's going to take some time. So just I'll be down a little bit. So, we had the fighter come into the cage and, announce that he couldn't fight and what happened. And then the rest of the night, the rest of the fight card went off great. And then that night, after the fights, when we were talking about the cage with the guy from Axis, we explained what had happened. And he was so impressed that we were able to pull off a professional show with all the craziness that was going on. Oh, and someone else in the undercard pulled out of the fight in the locker room because his heart was racing so fast because he was nervous that he thought he was having a heart attack. And he told the ringside commission that he didn't think he should fight because he thought he was going to have to go to the hospital. So we had 2 fights fall out in the locker room. And Axis ended up giving us, I think it was like a 5-year deal because they were so impressed that we were able to put off a professional show with all the craziness that was going on in the locker room. And they said, if you can do that, then you can do live TV. So, that turned into access, which is turned into UFC Fight Pass and whatnot. But that was crazy, man. That was probably the craziest day.
That was nuts.
You know,
Yeah.
and again, you never know if a fight's going to happen to you. Get into the ring or the cage.
No, the fighter getting on the plane doesn't guarantee anything. The fighter being at the hotel, making a wait, those doors have to close. Those guys have to be in that ring, and that bell has to ring.
So speaking of this comes into our next question: is what is the craziest excuse you've ever heard for a fighter pulling out of a fight? And if you need a second to think about it, I'll tell you mine is we had a fighter up here last year. Actually, it might have been October, November, to fight William Knight, and I get a call from Lewis, who works for CES, and he says, "Hey man, I need your help. This guy's pulling out of the fight. He's driving home to South Carolina." What the hell? What do you mean he's driving home to South Carolina? So I look at my phone. I got all these text messages from this guy. Hey, change my flight. I'm leaving. I don't want to do this. You guys are treating me bad. So I called the kid and sent Fred from CES down there to talk to him. And I'm asking the kid, what's wrong? I don't like this hotel. You guys aren't treating me right. You guys should have sent a limo to pick me up. And anyone who's fought for CES and has flown in knows that we take very good care of our fighters. We have a professional transportation company pick all these guys up in a big, nice SUV. Sometimes if you're lucky and you come in enough time, then they pick you up in like a convertible, just because that's what the driver has. And, he likes to take his car to pick fighters up. So we have never had anyone complain about our hotel, about our flights, about, our transportation. But this guy flew in, and I should have known, instead of him bringing a corner, he brought his wife and his sister. Their first time ever leaving South Carolina, I'm pretty sure. So looking back on it, I think they thought that this was like a little mini vacation, a little getaway to the Northeast. And they also weren't impressed with Providence. So when they went from Warwick down to Lincoln, where the hotel was, I think they drove through the city, and they probably were like, oh, this is cool. City's gone. Like you drive by Providence like that. And I think that was part of it. They didn't like the hotel. They said the room was too small. They didn't like the beds. They thought they were going to get like a suite. Listen, I'm happy that the impression of CES is that, we can offer, suites and have you picked up in limos and everything else. But most of the time, up until about a year ago, Mike and I were picking you up at the airport. You know what I mean? And we've always had good hotels, because that's one thing Jimmy's always preached, is to make sure the fighters are comfortable, make sure they're relaxed. You don't want to have a fighter come in here and have a bad experience and sleep in a motel. So we always put them up at nice hotels. And, any fighter who's watching this can comment on this about, any accommodations, because everybody agrees. But yeah, long story short, the guy flies in, he claims he was on wait. And then he started posting all these crazy videos and messages about, how disrespectful we were because we didn't put him up in a nice hotel. We weren't driving him around in nice cars. And so I add Mr. B, because his company, his reputation, he calls the kid to talk to him about it. His wife has him put the phone on speakerphone and then records the conversation of this guy being completely disrespectful to Mr. B, and posts it on Facebook as if he's trying like a gotcha moment to CES. And it was so lame, man, because, we put so much time and so much effort into this. But again, this happened the day before the weigh-in, and, CES did everything we could to make sure he fought. We flew a guy out from Seattle the next night. The night of the weigh-in, we flew a guy from Seattle to weigh in the next day to fight that night, because, as a matchmaker and a promoter, when we commit to a fighter being on the card, we will do whatever it takes to get the guy to fight. Now, it doesn't always work out, but I would say probably 90% of the time when a fighter pulls out, we find a replacement for him.
I would say so.
But yeah, imagine that. The reason for pulling out is I didn't like the hotel. I didn't like the accommodations. If you're a fighter, you fight, right? You fight because you like the sport, because it's your job, right? You don't fight because you want to be treated like a celebrity when you come to town. Yeah. Anyway, long-winded story. That was my story about the craziest pullout excuse.
No, call it what it is. He was scared to fight. Now, this is a guy, by the way, and you can mention his name if you want, but has a reputation of doing this and has backed out.
To be honest, I don't remember the guy's name.
I kind of don't either. I remember what he looked like, and I wasn't as involved with that as you were, obviously, on the MMA side. But just thinking about it, really, it pissed me off, because you're right. We do put a lot into our reputation and what people think of us, because if someone has a bad experience and it's their only experience with us, then they think we suck. If you go to a restaurant one time and the food sucks, you'll never go back. And if someone asks you about it, you're going to tell them the food sucks. And so the word gets around and people say, hey, CS is not good to deal with, and they did this, they did that. I know me personally, like I feel like I'm, you know, when I'm dealing with the fighter, I'm like the liaison. You know, I'm gonna be
Sure.
the guy. I'm gonna be a point guy for everything. So like, I kind of feel like it's me. If it gets screwed up, it's my fault, and I want to be the guy who's your point person and make sure your experience is good. Whether it's the drivers, you know, we've had issues in the past with drivers. We've got some crazy characters driving people around and picking them up, and not
Yeah.
always the most reliable. And you know, but that's on you. It's you know, it's an extension of us, and we're an extension of the company in that regard. You know,
Sure.
that story's crazy. I had a couple of good ones, and most recently, I remember about a year ago, making a short notice fight. And when I say short notice, I'm talking about 2 weeks. Fighter was from Nebraska. It's pretty amped up. In fact, he worked with Terrence Crawford's trainer.
Yep.
So a whole other experience of dealing with that guy. Now, and you know, nice enough guy. Don't get me wrong, but also,
Remind me, that's a good story that we got to tell after this too.
yeah.
Terrence
Well,
Crawford,
so dealing with Terrence Crawford's people, they're used to, you know, they used to big money just peeling off stacks here. And we're talking a 4-round regional fight. So the negotiation part was tough enough. But the next day when I get a phone call from the fighter telling me that he got bit by a dog while jogging, I wasn't sure. I was so mad. I'm pretty sure I might have aired him out on social media without mentioning him by name. But because I over the last couple of years, I've sort of taken off my own restrictions with that because I just get so pissed off at this business. And I feel bad doing it. He did send a note. I always question the validity of the doctor's notes
Sure.
sometimes. Like, I don't know if they could just go in there because you know how doctors who aren't fight doctors, if you get a hangnail, they'll tell you, you know, 6 weeks off, don't fight, don't put a glove on. And you know, anybody can go to the doctor and get a doctor to tell you to not go get punched in the face for a half hour, right? I mean, let's think about it. So I guess this guy did have a legit dog bite jogging. I don't know where he was jogging. If he was jogging through somebody's backyard or you know, unleashed pit bull. I don't know what happened, but I mean, it was just one of those weeks. You know, like you have those weeks where everything goes wrong, and like this is the last thing that happened to close out the week. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me.
Right.
It just like it can't be. We had a guy almost pull out. This goes back to 2013, one of the first shows I matched. The guy came in to fight Jesse Barbosa at Twin River Casino, and when he found out he wasn't getting paid in cash, basically threatened to walk out of the arena. And it was a situation where we had to basically all put on our, you know, our psychology caps. It's like talking someone off a ledge who wants to jump and commit suicide. It's like you got to start to get into their psyche and just calm everybody down, get in there and fight. You're going to get taken care of. And I had in the back of my mind, you know, I was still new to this. I didn't quite understand guys taking dives in fights, but when I tell you this guy took a dive, this guy took a dive. This guy maybe took one glance and blow when he was out. And before he could even get up and get his gloves off, he was asking where his fight check was.
Right.
Which didn't really sit well with anybody. So, you know, you deal with these kind of things sometimes. It's so unpredictable. You and I daily deal with people that we have never met before. You know, we have a good Rolodex, right, of fighters. Like we have a good circle. I mean, I can probably count on you know, 1.5, you know, maybe 3 hand the number of people in the sport that I can really lean on and trust. And if I can work with those people all the time, that'd be great. But that's not the reality of how the sport works. You often have to reach out, you know, break the ice, start a relationship and start a dialogue with somebody. But at the end of the day, you just don't know if they're going to screw you. It's as simple as that. You just don't know. And sometimes they do it backstage, or sometimes they do it 2 weeks before. It's not always a matter of if they're going to screw you, with when they're going to screw you and how bad they're going to inconvenience you in the process.
Yeah, no, and you never know which is the worst part. And you always have that feeling in your stomach that you could get screwed at any minute. We get time for maybe 2 more questions here, and then maybe we'll do this again in a couple of weeks once we can get questions from the fighters and the fans. Let's see which question. Okay, so this is a question about give a crazy story about being a matchmaker and maybe one of the more colorful characters you've met. So this one actually kind of goes hand in hand. The reason why I picked this one is because you kind of just alluded to it with Terrence Crawford.
Yes.
I would say one of my favorite people to work with in the sport, fighter wise, and one of the more colorful guys that we've dealt with is Hank Lundy, the boxer from Philadelphia. In my time with CES, he's probably one of the best fighters that we've had, if not the best fighter. A guy who would fight a moving truck if it was in the same weight class and he was going to get paid to do it. I mean, Hank fought everybody in the sport. He fought Terrence Crawford, who was pound for pound the best fighter in the world for a world title. He would go fight in Russia to fight someone in their backyard if that's what it took. I mean, but he's one of the most exciting guys to work with because he tells it like it is. He can talk the talk, he can walk the walk, but I think more than anybody, Hank was one of my favorite guys to work with. But this story goes back to the Terrence Crawford fight when we fought at Madison Square Garden. And Terrence's promoter had this deal where people from Omaha, Nebraska, right? That's where he's from, could get a plane ticket, fight ticket, a hotel, and I think a Terrence Crawford hoodie or T-shirt for the fight, all for one price. And he made it really affordable, so that way they could pack, Manhattan and pack Madison Square Garden with Terrence Crawford fans. Terrence's color was navy blue, so Hank Lundy, coming from Philadelphia, quick train right in. We were so focused on the fight and getting him ready for this that we didn't bring everybody in from Philadelphia because Hank's a road warrior. He doesn't need to bring in everybody from his hometown because he knows his hometown's with him anyways. So Hank brings 5 or 6, maybe probably about 8 or 9 of his most loyal and closest friends, and they all wear red jumpsuits that say Hammered Hank on it. So the weigh-in and the press conference were insane. I mean, these guys were toe-to-toe, jawing at each other. The press conference got nasty. So we actually decided, as us and who was the promoter, Golden Boy. Top Rank. I'm sorry, Top Rank. We decided, what, we're going to have the guys weigh in. We're not going to do a face-off. We'll have Hank weigh in. We'll get him off the stage, get him back to the hotel. We'll let Terrence weigh in, and then he can do his own thing. So that way these fighters don't fight, because they would have fought on the stage.
Oh, yeah, Crawford had shoved Hank at the press conference, I think 2 or 3 days earlier, yeah.
Yeah, so this spills out after the press conference, after the weigh-in, and I think we took a detour on the way out to use the bathroom or something, and Terrence and his people just walked out. Well, wouldn't you know, we're in the middle of whatever, Madison Ave, and we're waiting to cross the street, and all of a sudden we see a sea of maybe 200 people coming with all these blue hoodies on. So now this is like watching that movie Warriors, where people fight in the streets. I mean, we have Hank. I think it was Mike Senior, Hank, and probably his 8 friends against 200 people from Omaha, Nebraska, and everybody's yelling back and forth. All these cabs are blaring on the horns, and we're in the middle of Madison Ave, going back and forth. And I'm looking at Mike, what do we do here? So we tried to grab our guys. We got back to the hotel. We're walking to the elevator, and then 100 more people come out of out from towards the elevator. So now we're cornered in the middle of the lobby, and there was, again, maybe 12 of us against 300 people from Omaha. And I'm thinking to myself, this is where it ends, huh? Oh, yeah. This is the end of the ride for all of us.
But you know what? Part of the line, by the way, barking at everybody.
Once Hank and his guys started to get a little aggressive, and no punches were thrown. There was no fight. It was just it was a lot of jawing, some pushing. I felt safer being on Hank's side with those 10 guys from Philadelphia than I did against the 300 guys from Omaha, because Philly boys are tough, and these guys were ready to go against all 300 people. I kind of felt like the Ninja Turtles, because we're going to take on the whole Foot Clan, But
it was crazy.
That was intense. I to this day hope that they or wish that they had some lobby footage so we can go back and watch that, because I kind of want to see not what happened with everybody else, but you and I's reaction if we were as calm as I remember, but probably not. I think I was probably freaking out.
It started from Madison Square Garden across the street into the lobby of the hotel. I don't remember the name of the hotel, but it basically did not end until we got on that elevator and got back to our rooms. Yeah. I mean, it was intense. I mean, my father used to drive to Atlantic City to watch Vinny Paz fight during his heyday in the 80s when he fought Camacho and some of those big fights on Boardwalk at Boardwalk Hall. But that's Atlantic City. Think about Omaha, Nebraska to New York and making that trip. I mean, it just shows you the support that Terrence Crawford gets. And your story really just illustrates the beauty of Hank Lundy. I know he's not with CES anymore, but there isn't anybody I respect more in the sport than Hank. The best interview, if I'm putting together a portfolio for my publicity work and PR, it's going to be about 10 press releases I wrote on Hank Lundy, because he basically writes them for you with the way he speaks. And you're right. He tells it like it is. Because, at the end of the day in boxing, it's not like being on a football team where if you say something nasty about the opponent, you've got 53 other guys that have to answer to that. It's you. It's just you. Yeah. You got to go in there and basically back up what you say. And, I think back to some of the characters, and there are so many. I remember Drew Fickett in MMA a while back, who you made a fight for, who was kind of colorful. But one of my favorites, and he was again he was a showman, is Chris Chapman. if you remember Chris. Chris actually started out his career when we first worked with Chris Chapman. Was I gotta say back in probably 2009 or 10.
Yeah,
He
it was
fought
real.
Demetrius Andrade in Rhode Island. Now, Demetrius Andrade was only 9-0 at the time, and you had the typical rise at that point in your career. You kind of fight some of the guys that the WWF would use as those jobbers on Saturday morning, the
More like,
Saturday morning
yeah.
Superstar show. So Chris Chapman was a step up at the time for Demetrius Andrade, and our first time ever seeing Chris Chapman is at the press conference. I think it was the Marriott Hotel in Providence. And
Right.
Chapman gets up there in a deep voice, and he's referencing one of Demetrius's previous opponents. He's like, "Take heed, son. It's like, I'm not Patrick Cape. Take heed." I'm like, whoa. I mean, this guy is like got this dialed up to 10, man. This guy is intense.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something. I swear to this day, that is still Demetrius Andrade's toughest fight. I know Boo Boo's a 2-time world champion, and I mean he's fought. I can't even think of some of the guys he's fought, and those are world class fighters. But Chris gave him that toughest fight for those 6. I think it was 6 rounds.
Yeah, it could have been a draw. I mean, you didn't know who won going to the scorecards.
It was a very close fight. Chris, to this day, still wants his rematch and probably not going to get it. But over the years, Chris Chapman, if you remember, developed into somewhat of a Rhode Island fan favorite because he kept coming back. And he had no problem coming out here. He's fighting the promotions fighter. He's fighting the CES guy. He knows he's up against it. He knows he's not the fan favorite. But he became a guy that was recognized and respected for how he went out there and fought.
Yeah.
And he won fights. That's the thing. Like, he would come here and he would win. He'd pull off the upset against the hometown guys. So we keep bringing him back. We ended up signing Chris Chapman to a promotional agreement. He fought for us for a number of years. He fought Kyrie Gray, Thomas Followill. They fought twice. Chris beat him twice. Fought Grady Brewer from the Contender here at Twin River, among some others. And I can't even think of all the fights that he's had with CES. But again, that's another guy. It was never a question of if he was going to take the fight. It was just if it was, if it fit his work schedule, he was there and he was going to fight.
And if it didn't fit his work schedule, he'd probably quit his job and find a new one on Monday.
Yeah, he would quit his job to fight. And one thing I always remembered and appreciated about Chris was he also understood how the business worked. There was a time at a press conference that we had. It was the day of the weigh-in, and we did our little, post weigh-in press conference. And he actually took some time out to thank me and said, I appreciate you. And it meant a lot to me because, I think we all appreciate each other in this company. But a lot of times when you're dealing with an issue, it's never a good thing. Like, you're always dealing with the bad stuff. And it's nice every now and then when someone just comes out and says, "Hey, man, Pat, Mike, I appreciate you guys, man. Thank you." It was genuine with Chris. And I consider Chris a friend. Like, he's someone during this whole COVID-19 thing, I reached out to a lot of people, and he was one of the first people that I reached out to on Facebook just to, how are you holding up? How are you doing? Because Chris works for the Postal Service. He's out there every day still working. So, you deal with some bad people, let's face it, right? I mean, there are a lot of bad people in the sport, but you meet some good ones too. And I think after a while, you can call some people friends. It's a nice feeling.
All right, last question, and then and again, I think we'll do this again, and then maybe in a week or so, and maybe get some more questions. If Mike and I didn't mention enough names in this one and you want to hear some more, then I guess just let us know. Our Rolodex might get a little smaller by the end of our Matchmaking Chronicles, but so be it. You know what? I want to work with the right guys, and I don't want to work with guys who stiff us anyway. So this question is, what is the most rewarding fight you've ever made? And I thought a lot about this today, what the most rewarding fight is. And I'm going to go in a different direction. One of my most rewarding moments was, everybody remembers D Strong and Dorian Murray and what we went through with him. But there was a fight we had where Chris Curtis came out and he won a world title. And I think that was the first time he won the world title. And as soon as the fight was over, before he even did his interview, the belt had just gone around his waist, and he says, "Where's D Strong?" And I pointed him out, and Chris ran and jumped over the cage and with tears in his eyes handed his belt to Dorian. And he said, "I'm not a world champion, you are." And just like when you realize that, we can do a lot more than just put on fights, and to know that, Chris didn't know the kid. He just knew what we had, done to help support his cause and get his name and his likeness out there. And, Chris understood that this was bigger than a fight in the cage. And to see him go over there, nobody asked him to. He didn't ask for the belt back. It was rewarding. But, I think the biggest rewarding part of being a matchmaker is when you finally earn a fighter's trust, right? Because a lot of times you can make a fight, and there's guys who I've matched fights for 9, 10, 11, 12 times, and still to this day, when I offer them a fight, they think there's a reason why I'm offering other than because I think it's a good fight.
Yeah.
We mention some fighters' names, maybe not in a positive light, but I will say one of the more likable guys to matchmake with or for is Matt Bessette, and it's because I've earned that trust. And with Matt, I think we were on a string. I think he's fought for us a dozen times, but we were on a pretty bad string of about 8 or 9 of opponents who signed a contract, then pulled out of the fight. Some of them were 3 weeks before, some of them were a week before, some of them were a day before the fight. But every time Matt kept a really cool head, and when I said, don't worry, we'll find somebody, he would always say, I trust you, just find me somebody. And when you get to that level with a fighter and they trust you, and then it makes doing the job so much more enjoyable, first of all, but it also makes it easier, because if you're going out to find a guy and you think that whoever you get, the fighter's going to say, I don't, I'm not ready for this guy, or I don't think that's a good fight for me, or why would I fight this guy? Yeah, you're trying to get me beat. Matt never has that impression. And there's other fighters. I'm just using Matt because it's a good example. But when you earn that fighter's trust, that's the most rewarding part of the job. And we want to see, all of the guys do well and win world champions and become, big, famous and make a lot of money and support their families off this. But just to know that a fighter, accepts a fight knowing that, we have their best interest is probably the most rewarding part, I would think.
No, you're right. And that's a good point, because that's something that Jimmy Birchfield said to me from the start with matchmaking when I got into it back in 2013. And he still says it to me that you got to earn their trust. At first, I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, it's my job to do it. Just let me do my job.
Right.
But then I understood it after a while. Like, you're right. They have to understand that you're there working on their side. And that's not always easy. And it's something that, when I think about a fighter that I've developed that trust with is Jermaine Ortiz and his camp. Rocky Gonzalez, who really is my point person for Jermaine when we run fights past Jermaine. I never felt there was an issue, but I just feel like over the years now that trust is there. And, I give Jermaine and his team a list of 8 opponents, and it's 8 yeses, and it's whether I can get one of those guys.
Right.
I actually feel bad sometimes when I can't get the guy they want. I'm like, shit, I didn't do my job here. But this also ties into the most rewarding fight that I feel I've made, going back to February of 2019 when Jermaine fought for the WBC World Youth Lightweight Championship against Ricardo Kiros from California. Now, at the time, the youth belt, it has some prestige. It's 23 and under. They want the top youth fighters in the world to face off for these titles. And let's face it, in boxing, sanction and buys can be a little dirty. They just a lot of times just want your check for one of these belts. And hey, listen, you have your guy fighting for the belt. Just get us a guy that looks good and just sign us that check, and we'll put a title on it. But the youth thing was a real thing, and it still is. And the WBC had standards with it, and you could not just throw any guy out there for that fight. So I had done some searching on BoxRec and other sites. I had seen this fighter, Ricardo Kiros. He was 10-0 at the time, 21 years of age. He's fighting out of Oxnard, California. Big hotbed for boxing out west. It's where Roberto Garcia has his gym, where he trained his brother Mikey Garcia. Like all this, and as a writer, I'm thinking of the storylines. Like, this is going to be amazing. Undefeated Jermaine Ortiz, 9-0, toughest test to date, taking on Ricardo Kiros. Well, first time I tried to make the fight, Kiros' team didn't want the fight. And I'm like, well, shit. What do I do now? So as it turned out, Jermaine had some lingering hand injuries. The fight was postponed. He wasn't on that card, and we had circled back in December. And I'm like, it's kind of a lesson about persistence. Like, you got to stay at it sometimes. And maybe they say no this time, but maybe there's a circumstance and there's a reason they said no, and maybe you got to come at him from a different angle. So I developed a little bit of a relationship with the kid's father, and that's kind of how I found him. Again, this is like the modern era of matchmaking. You got to go on, you got to find who's who on Facebook, and if this is the guy or this is the trainer, talk to that guy. I had been having dialogue with the father for months, and I finally said, let's try this again. And you know what? After some negotiating, it was some hard negotiation back and forth. We got it done. And I'll tell you, I think we promoted the shit out of that fight. We really did. That was a big deal. We had a stack card that night. Giuseppe Cusimano fought Brendan Barrett. Marcia Agrippino fought Amanda Pavone. We had Shelly Vincent in a rematch with Adina Kiss. That was a who's who of New England fights. Everybody stepping up to the plate. And it all centered around this Jermaine Ortiz title fight. And, I felt a rewarding sense from that because, again, this was Ortiz stepping up to take a tough fight. He knew nothing about this kid other than the one video of a fight we had. And
Sure.
Rocky had said to me, you know what? He's like, I'm taking this guy because I trust you. That's what we say. I'm taking this on your recommendation. I'm like, well, boy, if he doesn't win this fight, I'm screwed.
Right.
But like it's equal parts nerve wracking and rewarding. Jermaine went out there, won the fight. It was a great night of boxing, and you know what? Stuck with it and got it done. It worked out in the end.
Yeah, and the irony of this is the fighters that we both mentioned, Matt Bessette's a world champion, and Jermaine Ortiz, I truly believe is a future world champion. And those are the guys that you earn the trust, because those are the guys that are in the sport for the right reasons. They're in the sport because they want to be world champions, and they trust you because they trust themselves. I think is the biggest part, is if they trust themselves to be ready through fight camp. And it's one thing if you're training for a southpaw and then all of a sudden you got to fight, a right-handed fighter or something like that. I mean, I get it. There's obviously issues going, changing opponents. But when you get to a point where, a fighter just trusts you, it's a big part of it is they trust us, but they also trust themselves to be ready for that. So that's we went a little long today on the first Matchmaking Chronicles here, but it's just the stories that we have and the ones that we haven't shared. So I guess let's do this again, and any fighter or fan or media or anybody who wants to ask us any of the questions. And as you can tell, Mike and I now are not afraid to tell you these stories. So if there's any fighter that you want to know about or any background, if you want to know how a certain fight came about, just let us know, and we'll do this again soon. So again, everybody, we hope you're staying safe. We hope you're healthy. Be safe so that we can get back and open the cage door and open the ring ropes again and get fights going on again. So, know at CES that we've been planning on different scenarios of reopening the sport again. So as soon as we can, we'll be ready. Mike, anything before we go?
Yeah, just to echo what you said, stay indoors if you can, be safe. Let's get back in that ring at some point. I'm really hoping before the end of the year that we are running live events again. I know the fighters are looking forward to it, and I know I am looking forward to it. I believe it or not, as much as I really hate matchmaking sometimes, and I look at these guys, by the way, have done it for like Russell Peltz, Ron Katz. I don't know how they've done it for 3+ decades. God bless them. But there are days where I just don't want to do it anymore. And now I miss it. I haven't done it in a while, and I do kind of miss the dialogue and sort of the dream matchups and scenarios. It was really tough March 12th, the day we were supposed to have Thursday night boxing, to have the plug pulled in that event the day of, and a lot of great fights that night didn't go off. But one last thing I would say before we go is a lot of these stories that we tell, the conclusions are made possible by the people we work with, you and I, whether it's Fred Blank, who's such a big-time part of what we do behind the scenes.
The man.
Field, senior and junior, Fred's the man. Louis Serrano, Justin Madoff, everybody, Denise Johnson, who helps us out on fight night.
Mickey DeCesare.
Mickey DeCesare. We have Kevin Barber now working in our office, helping out Jimmy. We've had so many great interns throughout the years, and just people who've just, for the love of the sport, have chipped in and wanted to work with us, and they really do help us make it happen. Sometimes you got to send someone off to handle something you don't have the time to handle, and you're putting your trust in them, and we have a great team behind us. So we got to do this again, man. There's no way. I got so much more up here. I mean, I don't have a lot up here, but I got a little bit left, and I'm gonna get it out at some point. We definitely got to come back because there's a lot more to talk about, and we have the time to do it.
Yeah, and to echo that last sentiment there too about thanks to everybody who helps us, is it's nice now as matchmakers where we can focus on matching the fights, because when we first started, not only were we picking fighters up at the airport to bring them to get their medicals done, then to bring them to the hotel to check in, but then we were also going to Twin River to put the ring or the cage up, and then we were going back to the office at night to order pizza and do all of our ticket work. And then we would leave the office around 2 a.m. and get back at 6 a.m. to then do all the stuff we have to do for fight day. So thanks to everybody who helps us not work 24 hours a day, the day of the weigh-in, even though it feels like we do. So again, thank you everybody for watching, and stay tuned. Later.